now elapsed. We now come to the second all question in the name of Lord Moylan. Lord Moylan.
My Lords, I beg leave to ask the question standing in my name on the order paper.
I call the Minister, Baroness Vere of Norwood.
My Lords, the Government is committed to providing Transport for London with a financial deal that is sustainable, supports London's recovery and keeps the capital moving. Any deal must be fair to the UK taxpayer. On the 11th of January, TfL provided us with a financial sustainability plan which sets out their plans to achieve financial sustainability by April 2023. The Government hopes to announce further COVID-related financial support for TfL shortly.
Lord Moylan.
My Lords, TfL has suffered a double blow to its income of the effects of the pandemic and years of irresponsible fare setting by the Mayor of London. While my noble friend grapples with that temporary challenge, will she also bear in mind that a railway needs steady capital investment too, and that there are parts of London Underground operating with signalling and rolling stock over 50 years old and creaking at the seams? Will she, in support of the Government's infrastructure objectives, seek to ensure that TfL is allowed a medium-term investment programme, however modest, to address these problems?
My noble friend is quite right. There have been some quite interesting fares increases or not from the Mayor over recent years. We estimate that over the past 4 years, his fares freeze has cost £640 million, which could otherwise have been spent on capital expenditure. But as my noble friend knows, transport in London is devolved, and it is up to the Mayor and the TfL to assess the merits of capital projects that they might want to invest in. However, it is absolutely clear that the Mayor of London must set a robust budget. He must demonstrate that TfL is on a clear path to achieving financial sustainability. The Mayor of London must prioritise his capital expenditure, and he will have to make difficult choices.
Lord Young of Cookham.
My Lords, many of us are old enough to remember renewing our road fund, not with the DVLA, but with the County Council. And it was £12, 10 shillings when I started driving. And I see that the Mayor of London has revived this policy as part of the problems of Transport for London, which will also broaden the base for local government taxation. Does my noble friend have a view on the merits of this policy?
My noble friend raises a very interesting period of time, which unfortunately I do not remember. But it is the case that the Mayor of London has these very interesting ideas as to how he wants vehicle excise duty to be spent. And it's one of the proposals that's in the financial sustainability plan that's been prepared by the Mayor of London. And I have to say, it does seem like the plan has been drafted with a money no object mindset. But of course, noble Lords will know that vehicle excise duty is actually used for the strategic roads network, which is the motorways and the major A roads. So unless we're going to stop Londoners from using our motorways and stop them from buying products which have been brought into London by HGVs travelling on our motorways, I can see absolutely no rationale at all for devolving VED.
Now call Lord Davies of Brixton.
My Lords, I read in the Financial Times today that the ONS says that as an average Londoner, I receive about £4,000 less in public spending than I pay in tax. As a proponent of progressive taxation, I'm happy to pay, but the fable of the goose that lays the golden egg comes to mind. Will the Minister agree that the economic prosperity of the whole country depends on a prosperous London, and that requires, among other things, a well-connected London with excellent public transport? Is it not remarkable that London is the only major city in the world where there's not a contribution from general taxation from which the whole country will benefit?
The noble Lord is right in that London does play a very important part in the economic future of our nation. It makes 23% of UK GDP. Well, it did so in 2018. But it is the case that whilst much of the funding for London comes from passenger revenues, there are other routes that the TfL gets money, for example, in business rates retention, which is a retention which would otherwise have gone to Her Majesty's Government. So one might assume that actually there is a broad breadth of sources for funding for TfL. But I do agree, and the Government wants to support London's recovery. We want to keep the capital moving.
And I'll call Baroness Randison.
My Lords, train operating companies have received billions of pounds from the start of the pandemic to keep trains running with minimal requirements in return. Why hasn't Transport for London been treated with the same generosity? And why is the government determined to dictate the minute details of the way services are run, which they haven't done on railways elsewhere? Surely, my Lords, this couldn't be political.
TfL has also received billions of pounds over the COVID pandemic, and I'm not sure where the noble lady is getting our information from about the differential between the conditions that are put on the train operating companies and TfL, because it is the case that the government makes demands on the train operating companies. We work incredibly closely with them in terms of what level services would be and, for example, whether engineering work should take place. So we do put significant conditions upon our support for them. We do put some conditions on TfL support, but, my Lords, I think they generally seem to be fairly reasonable ones. Things like looking at the future of driverless trains, things like looking at increasing efficiency targets. All of these things, I think, are perfectly reasonable.
I now call Lord Rosser.
Instead of levelling up the north, where the government have cut £4 million from the transport for the north, the government clearly intends to level down London's transport network, and virtually every answer that we've heard from the Minister today simply confirms that that is the government's approach. So could I ask the Minister to confirm or otherwise that the government is not seeking to force TfL into making cuts to its service levels, which would be completely counterproductive and place at risk the economic recovery of central London, which, like it or not, is still the engine of the UK economy?
Minister.
The government will provide funding to TfL. We have already said that we will, and we have said that we want to keep the capital moving, and that is absolutely essential. And I think we can also agree that the forecast scenarios, scenario forecasts that are available for passenger demand, quite frankly, will only resolve over a period of time. So the Mayor of London is going to have to think about his capital expenditure in the future. He's going to have to think about service levels. He may have to make difficult decisions, but, you know, my Lords, it is my opinion that there are a number of reforms that the Mayor of London should have done, has not done, and probably should do in the future, in addition to potentially looking at service levels.
Lord Moynihan.
My Lords, pursuant to the question posed by my noble friend Lord Moynihan and in the long service he's given to this subject, significant focus has been placed on new underground lines. However, does my noble friend, the Minister, recognise and accept that the settlement should focus as much on revenue as the vital need for a fully funded capital programme to upgrade existing underground lines in addition to the new Tube for London programme?
There are many strands to the capital programme, and of course some of them are fairly short to medium term, and the government will obviously expect the Mayor of London to make decisions which will encourage the economic growth of London. And I think one of the other important considerations when thinking about how we develop London Underground going forward will be housing. And certainly, I'm sure my noble friend may have seen that the government agreed to safeguard the land for the Bakerloo extension. It cannot be built now, but it may be built in the future.
I now call Lord Taylor of Warwick.
My Lords, what assessment has the government made of the potential for further growth in goods and passenger transport on the River Thames, which at 215 miles long is the longest river in England?
As transport in London is devolved, the government has not made an assessment of the usefulness or otherwise of the River Thames. I would suggest that the noble Lord takes that up with the Mayor of London.
Lord Berkeley.
My Lords, Crossrail's budget has been quite under pressure recently, and one of the stations that have not yet been started is, of course, Old Oak Common. Could the Minister tell the House what is the budget for the Old Oak Common station, and how is it broken down between Crossrail, HS2 and the Great Western? If she's not able to tell me, could she please write to me? Thank you.
Minister.
Had the Noble Lord given me fair warning of that question, I would have been delighted to be able to answer it for the Chamber. However, what I will do is potentially just discuss very briefly the amount of funding that the Government has been able to support for Crossrail. Back in August 2020, the board of Crossrail said that they would need another £1.1 billion, and I believe that that was probably to about P70 budget. So what the Government has done, it's announced £825 million so that GLA can borrow further funds in order to get Crossrail over the line and get it open for passengers.
Baroness Ludford.
My Lords, the Government commissioned a report into TfL's finances from KPMG in June of last year. It said at the time that this was in order to understand TfL's needs. The Government is now refusing to publish this report, despite businesses as well as politicians urging it to. The suspicion is that it is playing political games. When will the Government end this secrecy so that Londoners get the transparency they deserve?
The Noble Lady's right that the Government did commission that report, and it does extend to many hundreds of pages. It's got a huge amount of commercial information in there, which we would not want to see in the public domain, as it would not be beneficial to the future of TfL. But what that report did do is it did give us a firm understanding of where TfL is at the current time. I mean, it should be remembered that even before the pandemic, the TfL had a deficit in 18-19 of £494 million. So combined with that KPMG report and the financial sustainability plan that we've received from TfL, we are in a much better place to help the Mayor of London get TfL back on its feet, and the Government is ready to support that.
My Lord, the time allowed for this question has now